Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Exit Wound. I am Melanie Thompson, a New York City-based survivor of sex trafficking and prostitution. So in the previous two episodes, we talked a lot about what sex trafficking is and what it isn't. And we now know that it's not all zip ties and white vans, and that it doesn't only happen in faraway places. There are so many misconceptions about what happens to survivors of trafficking and prostitution once they get out of the life. Getting out of a life of sexual exploitation, however it happens, doesn't have a simple end. It doesn't happen by magic, and it's not some fairy tale rescue. In today's episode, what I want to explore is what it feels like to actually leave the life, those first hours, days, minutes, and months afterwards. Today, I have invited two incredible survivor leaders from New York City that are leaders in their own communities, Doraina Rochford and Laura Mullen. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
If you don't mind telling me, can you first just, for the class, tell us how old you guys were when you were first trafficked?
For myself, I was sold the first time when I was 12 going on 13, and my trafficking began in my late 20s.
Thank you for sharing that with me.
For me, I was about 9 years old, and my trafficking began when I was a teenager, about 13, 14 years old.
Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing that. Doraina, I'll start with you. I know you and I have had multiple conversations about this. And in one of our previous conversations, something that you had mentioned was that leaving the life never really even crossed your mind at first. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. So I don't know if I forgot. I don't know if I subconsciously didn't want to remember. I really can't explain it, but I didn't remember being in that lifestyle until we was at a trauma-informed meeting, and we were at Sanctuary for Families around the table, and these people were talking about sex trafficking. And they said something that triggered a thought in my mind. They said, there's three components to sex trafficking: the buyer, the seller, and the victim. Mm-hmm. And for some odd reason, buyer, seller, victim, it just penetrated something deep down inside of me. And I started shaking, and I had to run. I ran out of the room because at that time, that one moment, I started remembering my experience: buyer, seller, victim. I remembered those encounters. I remember being 9 years old, and my best friend would bring me to her uncle's house, and they would close the door, and I would be in, and she's, don't worry, 9 years old. This is what we all do. This is a part of our lifestyle. If you want to be my best friend, and okay, I was thirsty for a friend, then you're going to go ahead and do this. Right. And I think I'm going to stop right there because I don't want to go too far. But yes, that buyer, seller, victim, it just reignited everything that I guess I suppressed for all those years. And every memory came up that night at that table.
So you didn't even know that
I didn't know.
At first. You didn't know.
No.
It's very common for survivors to not have the language to really describe what's going on with them, right? Like,
exactly.
I mean, when I was in the life, like, I didn't really know what was going on. Mm-hmm. I knew Law and Order SVU. I had based a lot of what I was experiencing based off of what I knew I've seen on TV. And at that point, I knew that this wasn't what was happening to me. I don't know the name of it, but I know it's not right. Mm-hmm. So Doraina, I want to dig a little bit deeper with that, and I'm going to jump to you, Laura, afterwards. But you didn't really know what was going on until you got to this round table and heard these terms. And now you're like, holy shit, like this is me that we're talking about.
God, this is what, oh my God, that happened to me. Mm-hmm. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, but almost throughout my young adolescent stage all the way up until I was an adult. Mm-hmm. Because not only was I that 9-year-old, but then I was that 13-year-old in love with a man, and he made me do some horrible, terrible things in the name of quote unquote love, you know. And I think now that I think, I guess I was desperate for love, that I would do anything. I was young and naive at that point, but yeah. So it everything, and then my mother's best friend. You know, I never knew. I didn't even equate it. I didn't think of it, but she would get me drunk, put me in a room with a man, and she's out on the couch. It didn't dawn on me that her agenda was, I'm going to keep the money. I'm going to bring you this girl. And I didn't know, you know, it had came, and I'm going to be totally honest. I believe that it came a part of my lifestyle because of my lifestyle. You kind of understand what I'm saying?
That's a very interesting thought process. And, you know, we talked at some point in this podcast about grooming tactics. And grooming looks different for different people. And there's so many different ways. It's not just the fairy tale falling in love and then being... There's so many different ways that grooming can occur, especially in your childhood years. And Laura, I want to transition to you real quick, because I know, you know, as we talk about exiting, right? I know you as leaders now, but I want to go back to that beginning when you first exited. Can you tell me a little bit about what it feels like when you first exited? I'm not talking about before, I'm talking about way before you get connected to a service or a resource, like those first few hours. Can you tell me a little bit about isolation, those kind of feelings? What were you feeling when you first exited?
I mean, for me, it was I didn't know how I was going to exit. I just knew I had to exit. And I didn't know who to talk to, what to do, where to go. I was completely unaware of any resources. So it was incarceration, and I was sitting in the cell bed the first night, and I knew I was going to be so sick from my substance use the next day. But something inside of me said I was safe. Something inside of me said, you're going to sleep well tonight because nobody is going to want to touch you. You don't have to do anything else for anybody else right now except for yourself. And that was rest. And that I didn't feel safe for years prior to that moment. And I was like, I'm safe. And it was in a jail cell that I felt safe.
I know for people who are not survivors or people who don't do this work all the time, right? They don't really understand the true realities for survivors, and things that work for us, sometimes to the public, they're like, what? That sounds crazy, right? But the reality is, like, when you've been through the worst of the worst, which is what I personally consider trafficking and the system of prostitution, like when you've been to the bottom of that barrel, you will be surprised. The world will be surprised at the things that we hold on to that actually worked for us. You know, other people would be like, what? Jail? And, you know, it's not to say that jails are a good thing. It's not to say that incarceration is the way to go. But oftentimes the trauma that we face on the street at the hands of folks is so detrimental to our bodies, our being, our spirits, that I'm gonna leave it there. Some of the things that we've done in our exit could be unfathomable to certain folks.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And then Doraina, I know you've talked a lot about, like, you know, what do you think about what Laura just said about feeling safe? I know you talked about, like, suffering in silence on your own, kind of hiding in the shadows. Like, what do you think about that? Or either one of you, have you both experienced feelings of, like, suffering alone, like maybe that nobody's understanding how you're feeling, confusion even?
I can remember my feelings. Let's just say even on that night, at that trauma-informed meeting when everything came back to me, it was as if I had went back in time. And although I was years from it, it brought me back to it. And I felt so nasty, so dirty, so degraded, like nothing, empty, ugly, stinky. You know, I remembered being touched when I didn't want to be touched and not understand it. I hated myself. Everything just hit me that night, and I'm still not healed. Can I be honest with you guys? I walk around every day. There are days that I cannot get out of the bed because I'm not there yet. You understand? Healing is a lifelong journey, and it took me to face this reality because I tried to act like everything was okay. You understand what I'm saying? But I had to come to a point in my life where I know I'm not okay. My daughter said this to me. She said, "Mommy, it's okay not to be okay." And there are days that I'm just not okay. And yeah, I'm gonna leave it like that.
And did you want to jump in? I heard you saying like, yep, like when we feeling dirty and
yeah, I mean, all those things, like laying down, going to sleep that night, I got incarcerated, and all the flashbacks of everything played up until that point. Because I'm like, also like, how did I get here? Like, why am I here right now? Right, you know, and what happened? So everything's just playing back in my mind, and then I'm like, I'm never going back there again. I'm never going back to be that person.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Thank you both for that. And thank you for your vulnerability. Mm-hmm. I mean, the reality is like there are so many things that go through our minds in those first initial stages. Yes. You don't know who to call first. Right. You don't know what to do. You need a shower. I know in my case I need a shower. Right? Like bad. And it just, you know, like you want to have your mind focused on escaping. You want to have your mind focused on crying at somebody's shoulder. You want comfort, you want consolation, you need a bath, you need to eat, like you need bread. It's just there's so many things that go through our minds, and people don't recognize that is not normal to be going through all of those different emotions at once. Like even for, you know, what I call average people, like people who have never been in this kind of situation, even the worst of their overthinkers still does not compare to the feelings that survivors have the minute that they get out, right? Or that minute that they realize that they're unsafe or feel unsafe, the minute that they feel like they're isolated, those kind of things. So I love us, y'all. I think we're fascinating. Yes. So I want to switch gears for a little bit. So I want to talk about law enforcement, right? Because the reality is that for some of us, the first few hours can look like trying to figure out if we want to run to our parents, run home, find a family member, find a loved one. And then for other people, and this was the case for me, you run either into the hands of the police, you run into the hands of a detective, whatever have you. And a lot of us survivors, a lot of us people in general, but a lot of us survivors have mixed feelings about the police, a lot of complicated feelings around law enforcement. So, Laura, I'm going to start with you. Can you talk a little bit about how we view law enforcement at that stage? Not even talking about today, but just how do we view law enforcement when we first exit? What is that?
When we first exit, I mean, there was no view except I'm not trying to see y'all. Like that was the only view I was focused on, was not coming across them. You know, I'll never forget how one blue and white officer always would harass me on the block every time I was out there. And then one day he told me, I don't want to see your face around here no more. I'm taking you in. So I went working another strip in another town. But anyways, so it's like some of them really care though. You know what I'm saying? Because here he is telling me, I don't want to see you around here. Go get your life together, you know. But then you have some who treat you like the bottom of the barrel, like you say. You know, or I've been told by one of them I was not a productive member of society, asking my Johns why they're with me because I'm not a productive member of society. Asking my trafficker once, pulling into one of our local motels, the Bayshore Inn, and asking him, does he know what I do? He's my trafficker. Okay? So the stigma and everything right away was on me. Why? Because he's driving a BMW? Why? Because you never seen him out here like that? Because he was one of those, you know, in the cut type? So I didn't have a view of them because their view of me was I was worthless.
I'm pulling that quote out for Instagram. I'm just letting you know right now. I didn't have a view of them because of how they viewed me. That is so, I was about to curse. It is so freaking powerful. Like the police are, we gonna cut that out. Law enforcement, right? the way that average people in society, and I say average, like the average working class person, already has negative stereotypes and views on people in the sex trade. We have so many stigmas already attached to us.
Right.
But then when you add a badge to that kind of bias, it takes it to a whole nother level of how we're viewed, how we're seen, how we're treated. So of course, 911 is not necessarily the first number I want to call when I first exit out of this life. So, it poses a lot of difficulties. Doraina, did you ever have any experiences with law enforcement? She laughed.
I mean, I can piggyback off of Laura. I was picked up multiple times and by different officers, and even to a point, and I can say this, to a point where an officer arrested me and actually asked me if I would do him.
Oh yeah, they do that.
You understand
they do
what
that
I'm
out
saying?
there.
And I at that point, it was like a red just came into me, and I'm like, you dirty bloom 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 bloom.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? Like, and to this day, I really do have a stigma when it comes to law enforcement, because no, I don't want to stigmatize everyone, because like you said, there are some that do care. But what I do feel is that what we're doing right now can be a turnaround point for the ones that do care. And it can be a turnaround point for the ones that are uninformed.
Right.
You understand what I'm saying? Because some of them are just uninformed and some of them just don't care. And to the ones that do want to know what it feels like, what we really feel like, that we are human, that we do live, that we still bleed red just like they do. You know, that just because a life was given to us, some of us chose that life. Me, I chose the life of prostitution. Yes, I did. Because I didn't have an education. I didn't have what other people might have had.
See that right there speaks to how majority of us in the system of prostitution actually don't have the choice, right? On the surface, we feel like, yeah, I'm choosing to strip. Yeah, I went up there and danced. Yeah, I turned a trick. Yeah, I had a date or whatever. But you just said you didn't have no education. For many people, it's they didn't have the money. For many people, they couldn't feed their kids. They couldn't clothe their back. They didn't have transportation. Like, I want us to understand how, and I'm switching gears a little bit, but I want us to understand how the system of prostitution is so targeting and it targets individuals that are marginalized with multiple vulnerabilities.
Yes.
A lack of education is a vulnerability.
Yes.
A lack of funds is a vulnerability, and we'll get
resources,
into that.
a vulnerability.
You know what I'm saying? And we all, if you struggle with substance abuse disorder, if you have no education, if you need money to feed yourself or your kids, if you can't clothe your back, if you live in uninhabitable conditions, and we talk about this in another episode in this podcast, talking about the different precursors and misconceptions around this. But I want you to remember how this was not a choice that you could have made when you're coming from a place without having choices, right? I always have to say that you can't make a choice if you don't have choices.
Exactly.
And if you starting below the when I was younger, my dad used to say you got rich, middle class, poor, and dirt poor.
Oh my.
And if you start in dirt poor, right?
Yes.
The only way you can possibly try to go is up.
So
anyway, I say that I digress.
Yes.
But what you were touching upon, how there are some cops that do care. And Laura, that makes me think about, right now you work alongside law enforcement in the work that you do.
Correct.
Can you talk about how you were able to switch your mindset? Because you see how you started by saying, like, I didn't see cops at all in my future. And now you work with them. How were you able to get past all of the distrust and those feelings initially and now?
Oh, man, let me say this. The unit that we work with, they're just super trauma-informed, very person-centered. They meet you where you're at. I've watched almost every single one of our detectives cry, including our sergeant and lieutenant. So it was just them being welcoming that was really helpful in my process, because let me tell you, when I was incarcerated and those HT people kept coming and talking to me, I was like, I don't know nothing. And it was in theirs when they began to ask you, your situation, etc. And I just would not talk to them. And then when I got out, it was when I met the team and I was like, okay, this is different.
Gotcha. Do you think it was hard for you to transition at first? Like, do you remember the first interaction you had with officer in law enforcement where you were like, I don't know?
Of course, you're always standoffish. You don't want to speak too much, because I was like, I'm not trying to incriminate myself on anything else. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm like, can I be arrested? I'm telling my story, but am I gonna get in trouble?
Hypothetically.
Yeah. Right. Well, you know what Jessica did was, but no, but seriously, I just really, they made me comfortable enough to be that person. Mm-hmm.
I got you. I love that. I like hearing stories about the people who are swearing to protect and serve are actually doing their damn job.
Yes.
Not a lot of us are not as lucky. And I think one of the goals of this podcast is to try to foster more of those kind of relationships. Mm-hmm. We know there are traumas. We know there are some deep-rooted traumas, not just in ourselves with our own lived experiences, but deep-rooted traumas systemically with these systems and organizations.
Within our communities.
And we need to try to rebuild that in some kind of way if we're going to ever try to get past living in this darkness. And I want to now touch upon the services, right? We know in all sectors of all issues, we lack services. And we're a big city, we're a big state. We always going to need something else. But I want to talk about the services that did help you guys out. Doraina, I know you mentioned earlier, you kind of name drop Sanctuary for Families. Yes. Do you find did you find that any other services or organizations helped you in your journey?
Yes. So after my meltdown, after my slap of reality at that table that night at that meeting, I was luckily introduced to Restore NYC.
Okay. Love them.
Who is they are a godsend to the women that come in their program. I'm talking about economic empowerment program. Right. I'm talking about rebuilding the mindset. I'm talking about entrepreneurial services. They even do housing for the women that have been trafficked, and they teach us a skill. They teach us not only a skill, but they teach us, what do we call it? Like a way of life, so life that skills. We never have to go back.
I love that.
They start, if you need education, if you need a GED, if you want to go back to college, all of that. But mainly, I remember the first 4 weeks of our entrepreneurial class, they focused on mindset. Because I can sit here, you can teach me whatever you want to teach me, but if Doraina Rochford does not have a different mindset after all that trauma, I'm just going to be a person who wrote a book. I was taught overall, it's the mindset. You know what I'm saying? So I thank God for Restore, because my mindset is different. Because I was walking around all this time smiling, but still hurting.
Yeah.
Still lost in my own right.
How did you get connected to them or any of the services that's helped you?
Sanctuary for Families.
Person?
I was in a drug treatment program because I suffered from substance abuse.
Were you court mandated to that program?
I wasn't court mandated.
You volunteered?
I volunteered. I have 6 children.
Ooh. Go ahead, girl.
And I was in a 15-year crazy, I know we're on sex trafficking, but just a little short, 15 years of domestic violence. I went into Sanctuary for Families because I put myself into a drug treatment program because I know that my children deserved better.
So you did like a Google search or something of places you could go for your services. And I'm asking you these questions because I want for the survivors out there that are either currently still in the game or who have newly exited or recently exited but don't know where to start. I want them to understand that we didn't necessarily just wake up with the answers either. Like, we had to do some digging and figure out where we could go.
Exactly.
All right, I appreciate that. And
Yes.
Laura, did you have any services that when you first exited that you first got connected to that helped you, or a person?
I will say this. We on Long Island did not speak about human trafficking. And I had no idea there was so many resources until I started working in the field. Okay, let me tell you. And that's sad to say that, because I've been in a lot of places where they should have had some pamphlets at. They should have, even while you're incarcerated, etc., these places should be equipped with this type of information. And so that's where I got my help from, was while I was incarcerated. There was the co-founder of the agency that I work for now. She had come in. They were offering trauma therapy services and stuff, and they were coming in to do groups weekly, And it was there that I was like, oh my God, this is what I needed. Like, you want to help me get a house? You want to help me you like me? Like, I don't have to give you nothing? Okay. And I got myself into a program, which was another program, Outreach Women's Residence for my substance use disorder. And then from there, I kept in contact with ECLI. And now, here I am.
I know we passed this part, but I want to go back to it real quick, because you just said, like, one of the thoughts that you had was like, oh, you want to do something for me and I don't got to give you nothing? And that is so powerful.
Right.
But it's so common.
Yes.
Like, the way that we all think. And I mean, to this day, I've been doing this work a long time, and I still struggle with feeling like things are either transactional or there's always a catch, or it's too good to be true.
Right.
Or like, what you want from me?
Yes.
So then I try to, like, depending on what the situation is, I'll try to, like, go ahead and do something first.
There you go.
Hold up.
Yes.
Let me handle it.
That's right.
Because if I ask you to do it for me, I'm going to owe you. And that, I think, speaks to one of the things that we were talking about, some of those feelings that you first have when you exit the life.
Right.
It is so difficult to jump into a service or get connected with somebody or trust a person, because in the back of your mind you feel like you constantly owe. And I want folks that are listening to understand the importance and the value in what I'm about to say, right? It is so difficult for survivors to go back to being a productive member of society, like you said, right? But also a trusting member of society. It is difficult to build relationships when there's been a price on your head. Nobody, no human should ever be commodified, right?
Right.
And definitely not for a dollar amount. And I spent a lot of time in my own journey just messed up in the head, couldn't talk, nobody could get close to me because I got sold for $1,000. And for many years in my life, I felt like, and I don't mean sold where I pocketed the money. I mean, I was giving it to someone else.
Exactly.
And for many years in my life, I'm like, damn, I'm worth a G. Like, and I did not know how to, I didn't know how to take that and be able to, like, have connections with people, say hello to people without thinking, like, you just want to, buy me for $500.
Right.
Anyway, I do want folks to understand that one of the major feelings outside of isolation, sadness, confusion that we feel when we come out is feeling like our value is equated to a certain number. There's a cap on it. Yep. So that's something that
more
brought
like
up for
there's
me.
a hidden agenda or an ulterior motive. I try to be as self-sufficient as possible so that I don't have to ask anyone for anything, because I don't want to get hurt no more. I don't want no one to do something for me and then later on you say, oh, listen, I did that for you, so now you got to do this for me. Like, we're not even going down that road, so I'll do it for myself.
Right. If I can just speak to something you said about I'm worth a G, I'd be like, oh, you want to give me $1,500? And I'm like, oh, like, he thinks I'm worth $1,500. And that made sense to me. Like, I'm good. Like,
if it was over $1,000.
But we are priceless. If it was, we are supposed to be priceless.
Right.
So in my mind, I feel worthless, but that money made me feel like I was something.
That speaks to how messed up the system of prostitution subverts our mind.
Exactly.
The fact that we were so used to being lowballed, property of someone else, disregarded like rag dolls, right? All of that to then make us believe that $1,500
was a lot.
Is
Like
a lot.
we should have that praise.
like,
I
we
don't
should
know.
be
It's like so
grateful
confusing.
and it's just like the more that I see
We should be great. Like
and think about that, and and I don't even know if this is related to this episode, but it's crazy because I just thought about a time when I'm not going to sit here and get into my prices. My pimp decided all of that, but it was never over $500. I'll tell you that. Barely over $300. You know what I'm saying? So the first time that somebody had even offered.
But that's what I'm saying. Then you're like, I'm worth that.
You be like, hold up, that's kind of high. Wait a second.
Right.
But then as I realized, so like when you in the game, your mind, your the thoughts that you have about yourself are so subverted by this false perception of our reality, because that's what the sex trade does. It makes us believe, and that's why we call it a game. That's why we call it a life, because it is separate from reality.
From the real life.
It's its own little world. It makes us believe these things about ourselves that by the time we get out, we are so stuck on I don't know how to operate, because
I didn't even know how to write.
You know what I'm saying? We don't know how to write. We don't know how to speak. We don't know how to advocate for ourselves, because we are so and I don't even know y'all backstories like that, right? So I can only infer that we all are sitting here nodding our heads with the same kind of. No matter how different the story was, we have the same understanding of what, because the game is targeting, right? And it makes us each believe the same things about ourselves. So like when you're in it, when you're in the thick of it, you like, $500 a lot of money. That's more than I ever got, right? And now, as I started to get older and out of that life, and I've exited. Then I started thinking $1,000 ain't shit.
Yes.
Okay, that's not even rent. Right. So it's just like, wow, this whole time society has had me believe that this was my worth. And I struggled with that. And I think so many survivors who first exit struggle with that.
Yes.
But I don't know how we took it back, but I told you the conversations are going to run raw, honest, and natural in here.
And not to cut you off, but you're mentioning the struggle, and somebody came to me and opposed, a proposition for me about taking a higher position somewhere. And
good for you.
No, but I'm like so used to having somebody tell me what to do that I'm like, how do I tell somebody else? I was like, I don't know. I think I'm happy with what I'm doing. Like, I don't know.
That's real. It's hard to be on the bottom.
Right.
You don't know. And the what's crazy about this system and what it does and the psychological and emotional effects it has on us, right? Not only does it make us inferior in those moments, so not only does it strip us of our voice per se, but it also creates this sense of self-doubt. Now everything that you knew about yourself, you know that you're smart, you know that you're articulate, you know that you can, be in any of these spaces, you know that you could be somebody's boss, right? In the 9-to-5 world, right? But somehow you still
questioning.
Well, how am I going to tell them what to do?
Questioning myself.
And all my life they were telling me what to do.
You know what I'm saying? That is, it's insane the way that we have really evolved and the way that we really turn our lives around and get out of that, which brings me to this. So like, tell us what you're doing now, Laura. Like, what do you do for work in this movement? How do you operate? Where do you operate?
Man, I really try to get into every space, but I have my Survivor Advisory Board, which is the first one on Long Island. And when I created it, it was really just to inform my community. They think it's not there and everything's hidden and it doesn't exist, but it does. So I really set forth to make it be known. I'm raising a lot of awareness. I'm getting into schools. I do direct service through ECLI Vibes, who has been my support this entire time, and I'm the anti-trafficking service advocate there. And I also am the project coordinator for Girl Vow out in the Bronx, and they work with at-risk youth here in New York City. We started a task force for the missing and murdered BIPOC people, edit that out. Because I'm not saying it correct.
I got you.
We started a task force. It passed into law December something, and so we are beginning to do research around that with John Jay College and stuff, and it's kind of like we're doing out on Long Island with the Suffolk County Anti-Trafficking Initiative. Out here, it's going to be like missing persons task force doing the same type of work we're doing for human trafficking. So that's where I am at right now.
I love that. And just plug yourself in again for people who may not have caught that. You said EC.
Yeah, it's ECLIVIBES.org. That's our website, and you can search HTSAB Long Island on Instagram.
Thank you for that. Doraina, tell me, how do you feel like your experiences, the things that you've been through, have helped shaped how you help other survivors today?
Every single angle of pain and darkness and despair has created me and afforded me the opportunity to help other women and men who are still suffering in silence in the domestic violence world. Like, if I never went through what I've went through, I wouldn't have made my pen my best friend and my piece of paper my audience. I'm a writer, I'm a journalist. So in this little transition that I've gone through and beginning, can I say, be honest, beginning to trust myself and to know myself and believe in myself again, I was able to create a book called From Tragedy to triumph.
I'm like, do you know your
tragedy through trauma to triumph.
That's it.
You know,
I'm trying to tell her the name of her own book.
I'm sorry. It's basically a book of poems
It's
that
beautiful.
I wrote about my past, you know, and I'm working on.
I think.
Yes, you bought my book.
I have your
and
book.
I'm working on my next book because, you know, a lot of people are saying, well, you wrote about the poems. Well, they want to hear the meat. They want to hear the good stuff.
The tea.
But I'm thinking about making that a next book called I'm Still Here, which will be really about the testimonies of getting over drugs and, you know, getting off the streets, like what we're doing right now, you know, because some people, they when they're in it, but when they're out of it, they're afraid to talk about it. So I'm just basically getting the word out there that there's life after death. There's hope after dope. You know, we still are able to overcome whatever dark, dirty secrets, whatever dark, dirty lifestyle that we might have lived, and we can still live and become someone special.
I love that. If you were to tell either a community member, a legislator, or somebody that can do something in the community, one thing about what it's like for people when they first exit the game, what would you tell them?
Hopeless. You feel hopeless.
Is there anything you think that they could do?
Educate themselves.
Educate
themselves about what a person goes through when they're in what we were in, so that they can have the tools, the necessary tools to help someone come out. Because if a person don't know how to bring you out, if they can't come in, then how they gonna bring you out? You understand what I'm saying? Education. Like,
That's real.
education.
I love that.
Make it mandatory for certain workers.
That
You understand?
one.
I'm very serious. Like, make it a law that the police, the legislation, any and everybody who holds a title that works with people, period, should be mandated to take courses about dealing with humans on a human level.
Right.
I hear that. I love that. Nice and powerful. So, as we begin to wrap up here, I just want to highlight that you two are both amazing.
Thank you.
And
So are you.
as you guys know, this work that we do, writing books for the world to understand, working with survivors directly, working with law enforcement, telling our stories, blah, 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 it's exhausting. It can be exhausting. It can be very disheartening. We know that it's not all roses and butter, right? So I like to close out each of my episodes by completely transitioning away from all of that, because what I know in in the years that I've been doing this work and the amount of people that I've met over all of these years, I know that every survivor is not only unique, but is usually creative. Mm-hmm. I want you to tell the audience out there one thing or one way that you use creativity as a form of resistance. And that could be anything that you do that brings you joy. That could be anything you do for self-care that makes you happy. That could be you actually have some kind of creative talent. Share something like that with me. I'm curious to know because I don't even know. I mean, I know you said you write books, but separate from that, do you do something that brings you joy?
I praise dance in my church, and I've become a chaplain. I'm a chaplain. I go around and I help the people that are less fortunate, you know, go to the hospitals, because helping others helps me, you know, seeing the look on other people's faces that when I walked in the room, they were sad, they, you know, were crying or didn't have a visit. You know, I came in and I lit up the room, you know, and,
did you do a little shimmy when you walked in there? Like, you praised dance in the hospital?
Yes, I have.
Oh,
I have. I also sing. I sing on the
What?
Yes,
you gonna
I
bust a
sing.
no fuss real quick? You gonna...
No.
Cameras are rolling.
No, and I pray, and meditate, because this life is hard.
That's
you
right.
know, while you're in that life, but relearning how to live again is hard.
That's
Especially when you're struggling with mental health or you're struggling with PTSD, you know, struggling with all the trauma scars. That's what I'll call them, the trauma scars, you know, so it's like rebuilding a life all over again at 55, you know, and I'm just being totally honest. But
you
I believe in myself.
Hospitals.
Yes. And there's nothing that I can't do. There was a time when I did not believe in me, and, you know, all I felt for myself was that I was nothing. I was nobody. I was incapable of creating anything. But today, it's just the opposite. I can do all things through Christ that strengtheneth me. You know, and I want the world to know that, like, no matter what, you know, get back up and find, you know, even if it's sweeping a floor, no matter what it is, there's something out there for each and every one of us who, especially after a billion people told you that you'll never be nothing, all you ever be is a crackhead whore. That's a lie, because look at me now.
I love that. Laura, what about you? How do you use creativity as a
So
form of
listen.
resistance? I'm actually laughing at that.
I don't have nothing. I already told you last time. I don't. Listen,
What
no.
brings you joy? What's something you do that
Listen,
brings you joy?
I like to eat. We had this conversation
That's
already.
real. That's real. Right? That's all right.
But seriously, like, I think it's like I'm only like a good 3 years into my exit, and I think I'm still trying to figure out where to put all that self-care and self-me stuff. Right now, I'm literally just delved into my work and just getting out wherever I can. And, you know, I have a 22-year-old son, and I'm going to school for my KSAC, and I don't, honestly, I sleep when I can. Like, so
is self-care.
I don't have much self-care, but I will get there.
Is there something that you want to do if you had the opportunity? Or want to try that you've never tried?
I mean, I know the same with her. Everybody's like, the book. I do write as well, and I do have this creative expression segment that I do at a few events for Northward Health Cycling for Change every year. So something in that space, but yeah, I'm not sure yet. Cycling for change.
Ooh, I can't even sit on a bike anymore. When I was younger, I'd be riding right now. I'd be like, boom, right to the... Yeah, it's time for me to go back to the gym, y'all. Doraina, Laura.
I got one of those memberships.
I got a membership.
I just don't know. I know. It's so bad.
It's just taking out my account.
I called today exercise, walking from Penn to the studio.
Exactly. If you live in New York City and you walk up them train stairs every day, that's exercise. Okay, that's real.
Right. That's right.
Doraina, Laura, thank you so much for being a part of this episode. You two are amazing leaders.
You.
I would love to continue the conversation. I will gladly put all of the resources that y'all mentioned in New York City in the list for other survivors and community members to know more about where survivors can go. If you're watching, Be sure to join us next week for episode 4. The exit part 2 is going to be juicy. We're going to be talking about incarceration and what it's like to try to start a clean slate when legally you don't have one. I'm Melanie Thompson. Thanks for watching.